So Tucker Carlson's claimed on his show tonight that they have received emails from a Google exec, and the email would have been sent the day after the election in 2016. So we're talking November 9th, 2016. And these emails show that Google was diverting resources to help their side's voter turnout, which would be the Democratic, as the context of the email shows, the Democratic side. And this is going to be a big story for a couple reasons. The first thing I want to talk about is I did a video previously, which I'll link, that discussed how I told people on the left for months that they needed to stop hyperventilating about this story about these Russian trolls using Facebook, and how we needed to have investigations, and Congress was up on their soapbox and how outrageous this was, and they continue to talk about how this could have swung the election. We were talking about like a couple of tens of thousands, like $50,000 or maybe even up to $100,000 spent by Russian trolls on ads on Facebook. That's it. When you compare this to the billions of dollars spent by both sides on the election, do we really think that those couple ads would have had any influence at all? Yet they claimed they used this as the impetus for, oh, we have to haul Facebook in, we have to haul Twitter, we need to investigate this, we need them to censor fake news, we need to do a better job of making sure that trolls can't be spreading fake news. And I knew this was a mistake because they've tacitly admitted then the power that just a few people using these platforms could have. So what would happen then if those platforms themselves and the people that ran it were actually in the bag for one political party over another? And that's what we're starting to see in various other stories, such as the banning of people on these platforms, which, again, I talked about in the other video. But this story particularly, Google, the world's largest search engine, which it's been admitted would have the power, they've said themselves, they could have the power to swing any election because they are so powerful and so much knowledge through the internet goes through them and their searches that people, without even knowing it, they could swing an election by directing people to articles, hashtags that favored one side versus the other. So that's the first reason this is important. The second reason it's important is, remember, there was a story a while back about Trump supposedly, did he violate campaign finance violations by paying off women that he had supposedly slept with, or that were going to come public about sleeping with him. And supposedly he had involved the person who runs the National Enquirer. And this was a huge story for a week. The media, oh, this is campaign violence. He had people at the National Enquirer basically donate funds to his campaign by paying for these stories and bearing them. And that's an in-kind contribution to the campaign. And therefore, Trump should, face these laws. We should impeach him. It's a horrible crime, etc. Only, what do you think's a bigger story? That, which if it's against the law, don't get me wrong, my stance the entire time has been, if Trump's broken any laws, he should be held accountable. I just get upset that that's only Trump for some reason. When everyone else breaks campaign violation laws all the time and does all these other shady things like not filing as foreign lobbyists, etc., they seem to never get punished. It's just Trump. I wonder why that is. But yeah, I just want equal application of law. Anyways, but that's small potatoes compared to Google itself diverting resources, one of the world's largest companies diverting resources to help the DNC and to help Hillary's campaign. And if this wasn't filed as a campaign contribution, that would be such a more massive contribution to that campaign in the form of goods and services, which would qualify, which would be a much larger violation. So not only would Google have violated the law, but if they worked in tangent with, if they worked in combination with people from the DNC or from Hillary's campaign, and they knew that Google was doing this, then that would mean that those people in the DNC and Hillary's campaign would also be responsible for violating campaign finance laws. This is the Trump story on such a more massive scale. We're talking about the difference between the National Enquirer running a story about someone sleeping with Trump and burying it versus one of the world's largest search engines who people, including Google, have admitted have the power to sway just about any election if they chose, burying or directing resources towards one campaign, the DNC and Hillary's campaign. This makes this a huge story. Now, the email specifically, they didn't show the email, which I actually don't like. I'll link to what I have below, but it's this woman talking about how she's driving out, she's basically lamenting the fact that they did a good job at diverting these resources to drive up Latino votes, and they just wanted to do so in swing states. For example, she says, she quotes Arizona as being a state that would be important to drive out turnout for, quote, quote, our side, which means the Democratic Party. She also is working with groups that claim to be nonpartisan. I believe it was called Vote Latino, that claims to be nonpartisan and just driving out vote, but they constantly say things like Trump is the enemy, we need to vote to get him out, etc., etc. So clearly a partisan group. And she's lamenting the fact, talking about how she was going to take a vacation. This is the woman writing the email, by the way, the Google exec. She was going to take a vacation, but now she can't because she feels so bad. Now they have to work because it was such a loss and such a devastating blow for her community. All of this goes to show that she's admitting that they've diverted much resources and actually did a good job of driving out the Hispanic vote in these regions, but unfortunately it didn't go the way they want. In fact, she laments, who could have foresaw that 30% of Hispanic people would have ended up voting for Trump? This is what everyone's known secretly, but no one really talks about, is that these tech companies are in the bag for the DNC. We know this, right? Remember the story about Fusion Analytica, which was this firm that was hired by Trump's team in the RNC to use Facebook data to be able to target possible voters and try to drive up these votes. Now, to normal people like me and you, that might sound like, well, what's the big deal? You know, it's just like basically commercials, targeted ads, who cares? But that stuff is important. And the reason you know that it's potentially works is because people spend billions of dollars on these targeted ads. So you know that there must be some effect. So with Facebook Analytica, it came out as a big story. Oh, they used people's Facebook data, and you know, Trump's a terrible person and this company's terrible and they should be punished, and we had to have investigations in Congress. We had to have hearings on this. Yet what no one admits is in 2012, Barack Obama and people, the same, I believe it was The Guardian, the same company that, the same news organization that broke the Fusion Analytics story, was bragging about how Obama's worked with Facebook to get all this data, and it's the future of politicking. What a shrewd move to win the 2012 election by using this Facebook data. In other words, when Trump's people used just a small company that was using a small amount of the portion of the data Facebook has, that was considered criminal and horribly unethical. But 4 years earlier, when Obama was piling, and there's emails that show this, was working with the people that run Facebook themselves to get this data and partner with them, that was considered very ethical and a shrewd thing to do. This is another example of that. We have where we look at these, the same things that Trump's being accused of doing that the media blows up about and can't believe it. It turns out that the Democrats are doing exponentially more. So remember, we have this story that, and again, if Trump violated campaign finance laws, he should be held accountable. I truly believe that. So perhaps he, by having the National Enquirer bear stories about sleeping with people, that could have possibly affected the election in a very small way, and he should be held accountable. Compare that, though, to Google diverting resources and not reporting their contribution to try to help the Democrats win, and that is an exponentially larger problem. This just goes to show, again, that these companies, and I'm a libertarian, but something's got to happen. This is the potential to subvert our democracy even far worse than it already is occurring, where we can have unelected tech people, a few wealthy people that control these platforms, just totally without people knowing it based on how they use their algorithms, steer an election to one side versus the other. And that's totally unacceptable. So I think that this needs to be seriously discussed. I don't have the solution, but this is something that should worry all of us, even if you're on the left, right? And you don't like Donald Trump and you're like, whatever, this is sour grapes. This should worry you too. Don't forget, right? The left and the right, the establishment, they're basically one big club, right? That's why they didn't want Trump. And that's certainly why the Democrats cheated Bernie Sanders. And they will do that again. They will not leave an independent person in there. These tech groups are going to go for the establishment groups, particularly those on the left. And they're not going to leave a real outsider that wants to help the common person like me and you. I truly believe that both parties, you could come from the left or right. I happen to come from the right, but you could be well-intentioned and come from the left and still have plans to help the average person out. I salute that, even though I disagree. The problem is both of those voices that don't want to play the establishment ball are going to get silenced out. And if we allow these tech companies to basically keep any message, we already know, for example, that the mainstream media isn't going to report on like third parties or outsider type candidates except Donald Trump. And the reason they did it for Trump was because this was Hillary's plan all along. She wanted to go against Trump, thought she'd wipe him out. So they gave him all this free press. And then once he won the primary, they spent the entire time bashing Trump, figured it would be in the bag for Hillary, but it didn't work out that way. So never forget that we know the mainstream media isn't going to allow these alternative voices to come out. And if tech is able to censor those voices too, then we have a real problem. The internet should be free. It should be an expression for free voices, and we shouldn't have these tech companies be censoring or diverting resources to help one side or another. And that's going to be a bigger overarching issue. But in this particular case, we should look at the laws that are already on the book. And if this email is true, that means that there were campaign finance laws broken, and people at Google should be held accountable, and as should people in Hillary's campaign or the DNC if they were involved in this as well.